started. All right, couple of things. By design, it was easier to do the skin stuff. They didn't have great illustrations. I'm going to show you some illustrations today. But I went over the basis of the skin disease. Is it important? Yes. Is it a giant point of emphasis on the final? Probably. So I think it's really straightforward on the final exam. So I'm almost done with it. I have some fungal diseases to do and show you some pictures. But I did want to, because inevitably I would forget, because it's been reclassified, and that's Lyme disease. So it's really a good one to start with. For years, Lyme disease was classified as a skin disease because its major manifestation, that thing called a target or a bullseye rash, bullseye rash. And that's the major that's the thing that identifies it. But it's not. It's interesting because we're going to encounter a disease in the next chapter we do, which is urinary tract disorder, which is sexually transmitted, called syphilis. And they're both gram-negative microaerophilic spirochetes. It's interesting. It's all about your immune system. So it's classified appropriately here because really what's doing the damage more so than syphilis does a fair amount of damage all over the body. So it's hard to classify it uniquely that way. But to be sure, Lyme disease is very much from your immune system. So but traditionally it was always included this way. So and why I have to cover it, it's the most common vector transmitted disease in the United States. Number one, the hip rate. And that's all because of ticks. And everybody, if you're living around here, welcome to Lyme Disease Central. You are here. Late Ralph, our previous dog, unlike the current dog, fought a courageous battle with Lyme disease. Didn't even know he had it. Antibiotics took care of it. So we always used to joke he fought that courageous battle with Lyme disease. Nevertheless, so it's named after a cluster case. It's very accurate here. Lyme, Connecticut. Okay, nothing to do with the fruit. But it was, we started learning about ticks. When I was learning about microbiology, they called it tick paralysis. That there were diseases that could come from tick bites that were originally seen in the military and in other areas, and they would be, and effectively, they called it tick paralysis. We really didn't know a whole lot about it. So as you can see there, lots of cases, certain areas more so than other, okay? And really this portion, our portion, anywhere, look, you'll see that with the lifestyle, it's all about, when it comes to vector-borne diseases, you try to control the vector, meaning that you try to control the tick. So you have to address the life, the life cycle or the life story of the tick, which this does a little bit here. And part of why we have so many of these cases here, we have the perfect conditions for ticks. Ticks breed in areas where there's standing water, where there's streams. They got that green stuff. You've crawled around in them. You know what I'm talking about. Any places like that, little swampy areas, low-lying areas, that's where ticks breed. And so they're all over Connecticut, New York State, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, tons. And in confluence with a principal member of their life cycle, the deer, the white-tailed deer. And we live, as you all know, in white-tailed deer central. Just try, I see one when I walk the dog most mornings, at least one. Okay? So just understand that's why it's so important. And really, differently, what happens, you're fortunate if you see this. Okay? So I'll tell you the saga. It was during the 2020 summer lockdown. Okay, so everybody was locked down. We were still doing classes even over the summer remotely, that kind of good stuff in school. And we're sitting there on our deck eating lunch or something like that, just my wife and I, just the two of us. Everybody was living that way. She goes, I don't know, it's just, I feel something sore. I saw something red when I go in the shower, and on her upper thigh. This is the classic area. Ticks go to warm areas, upper thigh, upper arms, places that are typically where they sort of nestle, because they have to be there for a good 12, maybe 24 hours to basically inject enough of the bacteria that's in their bloodstream. So they seek a blood meal. We're the blood meal. Okay, and by doing that, what's in their blood basically comes in contact with our blood. And she sort of pair shorts on, starts to bring them down, and then son of a gun, oh! I mean, that rash. I said, oh my goodness, because it was red and it was starting to clear, and I could start to see the outline of the target or the bullseye. I went, you got Lyme disease. And so we went, and that day we went to urgent care up on Perry Highway in North Hills. I mean, I didn't even go in because, you know, you're in nobody could come in unless they were that. Everybody was going crazy over that, over the COVID stuff. She comes back out. She took one look at it. Whoever, either it was a nurse practitioner or the doctor, and said, we know it. Here's the antibiotics. I mean, so it's a classic presentation. 3 weeks of antibiotics. I think it was tetracycline, viromycin. And that is just my basic recollection. Recovered completely, thankfully. So you don't always see this. It's called erythema, which means redness, migrans, because it migrates, okay, or moves around. And it's typically days, but it can be as long as weeks. Lymph nodes, and then you get, and this is your immune system, flu-like symptoms. Chills, fever, headache. You just don't feel right at all. Okay. Now, the funny thing is, if you see that and you look at where the rash is, and you go, and what happens is the rash disappears. And what typically you think, oh, I had much, now that the rash is gone, I'm all better. Because actually you start to feel better. That's the problem. Okay, ignorance is bliss. And you see the same is true for syphilis, which has to do with a sore that happens to be usually on the genitalia. That's a whole different ballgame we'll talk about. But by what happens here, when the initial sign disappears and you begin to feel better, you don't realize that now, even though this area was teeming with tiny bacteria in and around the area, they have now gone throughout your circulation and triggered multiple areas of your immune system to respond. So there's 3 different phases of this. So the early, what we call disseminated or spreading infection, 2 to 8 weeks later. So it's, again, you could be very well a couple of months and not know this is happening to you. Nervous system, heart, all of these things. Headache, stiff necks, unbelievable pain, difficulty in moving, emotional instability, all of the above. And then if you still by this time haven't addressed it and gotten it diagnosed, then what you would have to do is what we call Lyme disease titers. You get titer for the in other words, there's antibodies there. So the damage is sort of immunological in nature by this profound response. But you can target, you can find specific antibodies in advance. It takes a few days to a week or so to get the laboratory results, but it'll be a titer, meaning a level of how many antibodies. And if you haven't done something by then, now you can get something that's permanent or fatal. Chronic nervous system, pain, paralysis, depression, all of the above. Very easy to get. And it's not that easy to diagnose unless in the back of your mind. That's why doing a history, and I'm going to tell you the anecdote in a second. It's relatively large. That's a spirochete. So it's an unusual form that we see, gram-negative, microaerophilic. Okay. Doesn't matter about anything else here. Introduced to skin bite by an infected tick. They multiply, and that's where you get that target rash, circular region. And again, it's a gram-negative, so that lipopolysaccharide outer layer causes the inflammatory reaction in the skin, and now the immunological response for the signs and symptoms, the second and third. It may even trigger an autoimmune response where those antibodies that I'm talking about are starting to attack healthy structures. It's to say it's not clearly understood would be, I think a fair way to describe it. And this is how small that tick is. So if you've ever had a tick on you, they're not easy to get off. It's not something you can just, like there's a bug on there. A lot of time that little head area will nestle, and there are tools for this. You can buy them anywhere. Any pharmacy will have like a little tick removal kit that they'll have, and you have to like put it over the head and twist it. It's very easy to remove because they're usually designed for pets. We removed them from, our one cat who goes out on probably more than one occasion. That's why they're all walking around with Seresto collars. for that reason, because though it's not, some animals have trouble with Seresto, ours do not. So it's not necessarily a collar for all, if that's of interest to you. But look how small that is. Okay, look at the dark green areas. Okay, if you've been, Wisconsin's relatively flat, as states go. Deer inhabit all of these areas. I mean, we are a tick central. And so it's very, very interesting with regard to that. We're an accidental host because they are seeking a blood meal. I'll show you the life cycle. So there's different species, but this is the most common one, the black-legged or deer tick. Hello. Exotes scapularis, which you don't have to know, up to 80%, often the bite without being detected. All of which is very true. So you have to have an index of suspicion. So if you live and reside in this area and you have animals that go out, they probably should be tested periodically, talk to your vet. They typically have a screening where they do heartworm and Lyme and maybe something else for a relatively nominal price. So we usually go to our vet to do that. It's a 2-year cycle, and this is by understanding this, you understand effectively why there's certain times. And the big mistake is this: we call these nymphs. Okay, so it starts here, transmitting Borrelia burgdorferi was named for the doctor who described it. He used his own name, Willie Bergdorf. Borrelia, I don't know where it is. Preferred host is a mouse, which spreads bacteria to other ticks. So once the little larvae open, they basically adhere to an infected mouse, as you can see there. And then it's hard for me to read. They go through a phase of dormant. They're already infected. And then when they undergo this metamorphosis, typical, very usual for insects, going from the larval stage to the full-blown insect stage. So this, after one season, at that point, they're teeny tiny and they're hungry. And they look for a variety of animals that are there. Any animal would be a suitable carrier. It could be a rodent, it could be a dog, it could be a cat, doesn't matter. Okay, and more often it could be us. And so this is typically, you think of the time of year, what you're wearing is pretty easy. Okay. So once they're infected, they mature. The deer is at the very end of the life cycle. The deer is where they mate and complete their life cycle, and many of them die. The female dormant, and the male die. Christian, we always get the short end of the stick. I'm just telling you. Have a good time. You're dead. Ignore me. Don't laugh. And so this is the other misunderstanding. Oh, by the time it is very unusual, unless it's an unusually warm winter. By the time buck season comes around the end of right around Thanksgiving, guess what? That's not the time you get it. Now starts the time you get it. It starts in spring, all summer, early fall. Once you get to late fall, not happening. Okay, by that time, they have already gotten on the deer and they're living there. They're completing their life cycle there. That active phase, as you can see, by the time you get into fall, and particularly late fall and winter, nothing's going to happen. So that's the peak incidence where they're active. Antibiotics, early stages, if you don't get to it right away, okay, by this time the damage to more or less has been done. They're not there. Prolonged treatment is going to, very, very much, we're talking about antibiotics 6 months to a year if you don't catch it early. And all of these types of things. So if you love to hike, if you like to go into those areas, understand the kind of clothing. Are they still using DEET? Does anybody know? DEET? I don't know if that's still legal. For years, that was the only thing you could use. Yes, there's no vaccine. And you can look over all of this stuff. Okay, I consider myself a pretty good diagnostician. There's a lot of morals to this story, but you'll hear what happened. So I was in my office, I'm going to tell you, 95, 96, 30 years ago. So I wasn't a newbie by any chance. I've been in practice a good 15 plus years. And I had this, I'm going to be kind. I say a woman, late 20s, came in kind of scruffy. This is the mistake that you can all make. We can all make. Whether you're going to be anywhere in the medical profession. She comes in scruffy. Oh, she's just, well, I can't take it. I've been to a bunch of doctors. I'm in so much pain. And I had a rep for being understanding. I didn't mind giving a pain prescription. Maybe not a good reputation, but I was more inclined to believe people than not. And so my immediate thought when she came in and I tried to touch her, boom, off the table, off the chair. What's going on? I can't, I'm in such pain. Nobody can tell me what it is, blah, blah. And so the only thing that helps me is that Percocet stuff. Bing, 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 drug seeker. So I said, but in the back of my mind, this young woman, 15 through 55, could she be demonstrating early signs of MS, some type of what we call connective tissue disorder, autoimmune disorders, blah, 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 blah. But there was really nothing obvious. So I said, I will give, and Percocets with class 2, so there's no refills. I'll give you whatever, 20 pills, and you must get these blood tests done. Okay. And I made an appointment for her to come back in 2 weeks because I figured the blood tests are done. Well, she came back a week late. Okay. And the blood tests had come back, so she did get them done. There was nothing specific. But of course, I did tests to rule out things like systemic lupus erythematosus and rheumatoid arthritis. In the back of my mind, Lyme disease did not register. And so, but I saw some irregularities in the test that told me that there was inflammatory things going on. So I knew she wasn't a crock. So she came back in very clean, so to speak, all, not scruffy looking, all with her husband in a wheelchair. And we both had to collect it. And you can tell when somebody's faking it or not. We both had to try to lift her into an examining chair / table that I could examine her. And I went, what in heaven's name is going on? She goes, it's just awful now. I can't move at all. And then finally, bells are starting to go over my head. There was nothing that diagnostic in your blood test. But to be very honest with you, I said, I thought maybe it was like lupus or rheumatoid arthritis. I said, tell me when this started, because this was in the fall. She goes, well, my husband lost his job. They live out, you'll appreciate this from our neck of the woods. They lived somewhere between Titusville and Corey, like out towards Spartansburg. In that area, there's only 2 things, Amish people and deer. That's all it. Well, we have 3 little kids, and all I do, we can't go anywhere, so I would take them for hikes in the woods. Lee? Well, yeah, that's what we did. And I said, a little while after one of these hikes, I just didn't feel right. Bing, bing, bing. So what did I do? At that time, it was up in that area. Now there's UPMC Northwest covers Franklin, Oil City, to some extent all the way over to Clarion Way and that type of things. Not there. So the only infectious disease specialist was Meadville, at Meadville Hospital. So I sent her to him. I believe it was him. I don't recall the name. Guess what? Lyme disease positive. He did the test right away. And I lost her to follow-up. She came back once more doing a lot better. She was probably somewhere between the end of stage 2 and the start of stage 3. The moral of the story is don't prejudge people coming in. Because she wasn't a crock. I mean, you'll see plenty of these people who are drug seekers, but there's a point where you have to, I think you're better off taking things unless there's something that you can search in their history and then be very thorough in taking it. If I can miss it, anybody can miss it. And we will all miss it. My understanding, she did improve a lot. I hope there was no permanent. Just to show you how much this can be a problem before we really understood it, I went to this is not my most recent, maybe I told you, not my most recent high school reunion. That was only my 40th. I just decided not to go to my 55th, don't start, okay? And you have a list of people who had died. And the one gal who was in like our group of friends that we all hung out with, went to parties with, did things with. I'm like, what happened to her? Her name was Anita. I said, I'm sorry. And my buddy was a class president. He go, I heard it was Lyme disease. You know, that was pretty startling because this is, you know, some gal under 50 years old, I think lived in New Jersey where a lot of problems. So that's my anecdote for today. I'm glad I thought to do that today because there's a couple of questions on Lyme disease on the final. At least the spirochete, Borrelia burgdorferi, the deer tick. You don't have to know Ixodes scapularis, all that type of stuff. Those kinds of things, the antibiotic that you would use, the fact that your immune system, etc. Okay, good. Got that out of the way. Next on the list. So this is the one we were doing. Please listen. I would be surprised if everybody got an opportunity to listen to that. Can't see spending a day when you aren't forced to listen to me to listen. But I went over all this stuff that was there, and smallpox not going to be on it. I'm sure of that. And leishmaniasis is not going to be on it. Maybe there's an anthrax question, you know, about that black eschar that and this is where I had left off, and we're almost done here. And this is something, the biggest single problem with athlete's foot, jock itch, these superficial fungal infections, erroneously called ringworm because they typically form a circular type pattern, and people thought there was like a little worm burrowing under them. So ringworm is a name given to it because of its appearance historically. The biggest single problem with these, they're dry, they're itchy, they get inflamed, and you scratch them. Your dirtiest part of your body is your fingernails. That's the whole thing, why we try to get those clean when we surgically scrub. We did this in my lab. Okay. And the whole idea, then you basically secondarily infect it with bacteria. This is a recurrent theme with skin infections. Viral infections, when I talked about measles and chickenpox or any rash-causing virus, if they're itchy, we scratch them, and all of a sudden you have little breaks in the integrity of the skin. They're easy to get infected either from dirty nails, or now you have broken your major barrier to infection on the skin. All of the above. Biggest single risk, secondary bacterial infections. Same is true for most viral infections in the respiratory. Secondary bacterial infection. Bacteria do damage. Influenza, a virus. Nasty, bad, does it kill you? No. Secondary bacterial pneumonia. Recurrent theme. So there's only a limited number of these, and they're confined to, and they feast off of keratin. Go back to AP1. What is skin made out of? Keratin. That's that dry, scaly stuff, and it's all in those 30 to 40 outer layers by the time it forms. In the stratum corneum, hair and nails are affected as well. And so the name that they gave them historically, and a lot of people refer to them, are tinea, derived from the erroneous belief that they were caused by worms. Okay, and they're neat. These are the kind of things you might have looked at in microlab. Maybe you saw something. This is called M. canis because it looks like a canoe. Microsporum canis. There's other ones. There's probably T. mentagrophytes. So there's like three. We had an expert in fungi teach us in our microbiology course for 2 months because fungi were rampant. He's from Egypt, and fungi were rampant in Egypt. If you're like me, if your business was working on feet and legs, you have to learn a lot about fungi. So they all have great names. Tinea capitis for scalp, Tinea barbae for beard, anywhere on the body. Okay, Tinea corporis. Prurus, jock itch, very common, more so in males than in female, but a lot of those other areas. Again, the common denominator, moisture. For most of these things, just like we talk about with Lyme disease, a lot of skin problems are with skin underarms. When it's on the body, it's often people with glabrous skin. In other words, skin that overlaps all the stuff, moist areas that are like that. Inherently oily here, it all depends. Feet are just like that. Typically, they start in between the toes. Nails are like that. Hair are like that. There's a lot of problems with this. and you will see them. It will gross you out sometimes. Only way to say it. These are the three genera that cause it, and yeah, it's not restricted, blah, blah, blah. Have the ability to digest keratin. They don't invade. They don't go deep. It's the secondary infections. So there's lots of ways that you can get it. Thankfully, most of the time, okay, topical antifungal creams and ointments, you can get them easily at a pharmacy, easily at a grocery store. Doesn't matter. They all work effectively. Be careful. If you're in a position where you're a nurse practitioner, do not, when someone comes in with a red hot athlete's foot or red hot jock itch, don't say, well, go get that antifungal cream, whatever, and use it directly. They will come back with anger in their eyes, because if you put something strong on something that's already inflamed, it'll turn into a 5-alarm fire. What you should at the very least do, have them initially use something like Cordaid, some generic 1% hydrocortisone cream or ointment, and rub that bad boy on. Let that calm down, then start alternating the antifungal, so like three or four times a day, they're alternating between cortisone and they're alternating with antifungals. It works very well. Voice of experience. There's an old saying that I was very good at dermatology. I live by this. If it's wet, dry it. If it's dry, wet it. If it's dry, you got to moisturize it. Ointments moisturize. Creams don't necessarily moisturize. There are moisturizing creams. They have to have something in them. You have to learn about the ingredients. Most creams are water and powder. When the water evaporates, you're left with powder. Powder dries. So what we used to use non-moisturizing creams or powders to dry things out. So if this is moisture-based, powder of choice, interestingly enough, whether it's foot related, whether it's jock itch related, whether it's underarm related, is cornstarch. Whether it's diaper rash related, it is cornstarch. Okay? We got away from using talcum powder. Talcum powder is tiny little particles, and it irritates. We call it counter irritant. The little particles get on your skin, and it's kind of, and so when you rub that on the skin, it creates localized inflammation designed to increase circulation, which is really how they work. Sometimes they soothe indirectly. The big problem with talcum powder when we had little girls, they're changing little girls, is it can get inside vaginally and cause a significant problem. So the switch was made in the last 30 years to cornstarch. And so you can go buy baby cornstarch, which is scented, or you can go get the big thing at Aldi's of regular cornstarch, and it works just the same. Cornstarch picks up. I used cornstarch last night for a slurry. For you cooking people, that's cornstarch. You dissolve it in water, and it's a thickening agent when you bring it to the boil. Okay. Korean meatballs last night with a glaze and dipping sauce. So much gochujang, so little time. No Korean food fans? Oh, hot stuff. No Korean, don't like gochujang? Oh, what you missing? What am I going to do with you people? Voila. So, for instance, you'll see all sorts of your innocuous infections, cosmetic, and I'll buy that. I had a student with this years ago. A lot of people get this is normal on your skin. It's called Malassezia furfur. I love the name. So Malassezia is the genus, and there's lots of different species. The one that's commonly causes versicolor means a lot of the way we diagnose skin problems with ultraviolet light. We have an ultraviolet examining light called a Woods. You don't have to know this proper name, Woods light. And I have one in my office. We turn the lights off in the examining room, and certain things fluoresce. We use fluorescence a lot diagnostically for the skin. This would light up different colors. And it's implicated, as you can see, psoriasis, seborrheic dermatitis. There's lots of problems with it in oily areas. This gal, and when I was teaching over at Chatham, she had this. I had the examining light because interestingly, we had one probably for use looking at immunofluorescence at Chatham, and her back was it was more cosmetic. It was no problem at all once somebody put stuff to reach in her back, put stuff on it. So nearly 100% of humans tested, we have it. It does not affect everybody. There's underlying reasons, genetic reasons. Hygiene will always play a role, but I think it's less than we think. It's there, and we already did the eye stuff, so you don't have to. Again, they put that here. I don't. Okay. Yeah, you can read through that if you want. I don't think there's a whole. Again, the difference between bacterial and viral conjunctivitis. Virus will drain. It will be more liquidy. When it's bacterial, you get that sort of pus type. It's a more mucousy or pus-like drainage. And if you've ever had it, or you see somebody who's had it, it's like you wake up in the morning and you're stuck together, and it's, oh my God, awful. Antibiotic drops work very well. I'm a constant eye rubber. I mean, I keep antibiotic drops. There are some very good homeopathic drops. If you're interested, I have them at home. If you're interested, I'll find the name or take a picture of it. That work very effectively because you could use them for. There's a lot of products for dry eyes and things like that. These work pretty well for irritations that might be tending toward conjunctivitis. And so a lot of them are allergic. Pink because the membranes in the conjunctiva swell, okay, and basically the blood vessels swell within them. They become engorged with blood. That's red. Offset the white of the eye, the sclera, white, red, pink. And so these are the ones we talk about particularly. This is the reason why it is mandatory in the United States to use antibiotic drops. They used to use silver nitrate. Silver nitrate turns the skin black, so it looked bad for moms and dads. Oh, my little boy or girl, what happened? They're mad at everybody, so now they use antibiotic drops. That's mandatory in the United States. This is the big problem with gonorrhea. This is another big problem with chlamydia. Nasty. So it's a direct transmission during vaginal birth. Very serious eye damage. Herpes can do the same thing, and herpes potentially can be fatal. If it's acute genital herpes that has been untreated or not, that's why prenatal care is so darn important for a variety of things, and particularly for vaginal birth. So if you're doing, for many of you in nursing, when you do the maternal child rotation, you learn all about that stuff. It's a whole lot of educating people to understand it. There's lots of other ones. These are the ones I was telling you about. Strep pneumonia and Haemophilus, very, very common. These are typically auto-inoculation, meaning the mom inoculating the child. There's lots and lots and lots of things. And right here is super, I can't tell you how contagious these are. It gets ping-ponged in a family. Every time one of our kids would start to show evidence of pink eye, we'd have to start the drops. We started on all three kids because they were so 3 years and 2 weeks apart. And we started doing, my wife and I. Sorry, my first wife and I. Routinely. I mean, we always, might as well, you're going to get it eventually. And so there's other types that you can use. Ciprofloxacin. I do not know if that comes in a drop. The antibiotic eye drops work very well. This would be the worst kind of scenario where it begins to destroy the cornea. These can be problems with herpes simplex virus, as you can see. Leading infectious cause of blindness in the United States. How's that? Herpetic lesions. Or infections with HSV can result from a sexual encounter or transfer of the virus from the genital area to the eye area. So, I mean, a lot, I mean, you have to be very cognizant of the presence of active infections if you can, particularly during intimacy. It's the best way I can describe it. And this is what happens. It's, I mean, all of a sudden, awful. There's even amoeba who can do this. It's scary, scary, scary. Thank God that's not. Pictures, more pictures. This is the problem when I'm not here for a day. I get excited. Don't worry about it. This is another tick-borne illness. Right, and it's more common here because we have more ticks. It's all about breeding grounds for ticks. Not, and this is a different tick. Okay, it's got a great name. Ticks have wonderful names. This is called Dermacentor andersoni. Not that you have to know that. And this is Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and he died of a tick bite-related infection. And it's fascinating because he was in the Rockies when this happened, so he named it. And the reality was that's not a common area. So these, and it's interesting, we did not know that these rickettsia, which was the name of this germ, as you will, was any specific germ. We now know it's a small gram-negative bacteria that actually lives inside of a cell. So it's very, again, it's gram-negative, but it was just not known. When I learned about them, there was a whole, we talked about bacteria, we talked about viruses, we talked about rickettsial diseases. Okay, and certain species of ticks, etc. Lice, this is called typhus. And so here, rickettsia, rickettsia prowazekii, not that you have to know any of those. Typhus was, in the concentration camps, typhus was rampant. Of course, people were dying of it because it caused gastrointestinal illness, diarrheal diseases, and it came from close contact and the presence of lice and all the dirt and filth. That's where it came. So they have to spray people. We had all these homeless people when we were in Philadelphia, and a lot of street people. They would come in clothes that, you know, they hadn't washed. Not the clothes, they hadn't washed, and the clothes hadn't been washed for, we didn't know how long. Yeah, the clothes were so bad we had clothes on board. We get the Red Cross to help us out, and we have to delouse them. We had a little, like a room, like a shower room off the emergency room, where we have to like powder spray them down with the delousing agent. How's that? Wasn't that long ago. I was there between 77 and 79. Yeah, I know it's pushing 50 years, but it's not, in real time, it's not that long ago. So skin is tough, but it's vulnerable from a lot of different things. So there's ways that can happen. So that was the background. This is all the background stuff. I want to show you the pictures. That, so we're talking about that exfoliating, 5% of strains. And I mean, it's just the skin. It's like the child was covered. And typically we see it in nurseries with second-degree burns. It's at the dermal epidermal junction. So if you're working in nursery, you can run into that. It can go through a nursery area in a hospital pretty dark, and potentially be life-threatening. I mean, they're quick treatment, appropriate antibiotics. It's typically not MRSA. It's antibiotic, you know, so antibiotic treating it, local care, things like that. I have not seen it. I've only heard about it anecdotally. Here's the impetigo. That's a good picture. Why do we know it's not like a herpetic sore, like a cold sore? Where it starts. I made this point in the dictation. If it starts on your skin, probably impetigo. If it starts on non-skin, lips, gums, anywhere like that, then you think herpetic virus. It's all about where it starts. Now, because a lot of times a herpes sore will go out into your skin, or impetigo will go into that margin where your lips come to the edge. That's always got problems going on. Typically, interestingly, that what we learned about it, it starts these little, they're fancy names, they're called petechiae, tiny little areas where tiny blood vessels have bled, typically start in the lower extremity. But again, it's all about the immunological response to the gram-negative we found out. So it's typically top of the foot, top of the arms, top of the legs. Here it is, rickettsia rickettsii. Notice moist Okefenokee swamps, swamps in the Carolinas, swamp central. It's kind of like where they're playing golf right now. All I see is the last two places where the PGA tours are playing. They keep showing alligators. Now, I have a firm policy when it comes to alligators. If I hit the ball over there, it's the alligators' ball. That happened when I was in Jacksonville. When my son was stationed there. We were playing golf on their golf course, which is right on the ocean. And par three, we hit over the water. And the one guy, my son's friend, who also is a destroyer captain, because he's finished his tour there. He goes, "What should I do? There's an alligator next to my ball." And I hire Ryan, free drop. Let the alligator have it. 3 different times we saw alligators. Their house was less than a quarter of a mile from there. What if they got hungry? I digress. Again, doxycycline, which is a tetracycline derivative called vibromycin. Again, it's interesting that these are relatively easy to treat. Lyme disease and Rocky Mountain spotted fever, if they're diagnosed properly and early, that's a relatively easy, the treatment course is relatively easy. Remember, I'm sure that was, but case fatality rate, 20% without treatment, below 5% with. Okay, this is the anthrax. That's called an eschar. It just looks ugly. The big problem if it's not treated or it gets into the lungs. That's there. So there is an inhalation anthrax, much higher fatality rate. Less of a problem today because of safeguards. You don't see it again as much as you would like to. Again, chicken pox, if you haven't seen it, there's a zillion photos and images online. My kids were covered in spots. I told you the anecdote. I'll retell it in a few minutes we have. My kids got in order, every 2 weeks apart in order. The eldest, the middle, the youngest. Eldest, 104 fever, covered in spots. We were delighted. Sent them to live with grandma and grandpa down here in Pittsburgh. Fine. Middle one didn't slow him down. Barely a spot. 101 fever. Just flying around like nothing happened. Daughter. Now remember, none of them are not genetically identical. No genetic ties. 106 fever, covered. Nearly life flighted her down here to Children's Hospital in Pittsburgh. I mean, her family, our pediatrician, family doctor rather, said, "Your call. We'll life flight her if you want." I said, "We'll just buy it." Finally, a fever. Very itchy. The shingles, flatter, angrier looking, following the course of a dermatome, superficial nerve. Measles, it's like someone took a strainer and put red paint and went boom, like that. Flat, red, covered in spots. That was me as a kid. Okay. Again, you see these little areas on the cheek, little salt granules are called Koplik spots that are dyed. While we look inside, German measles, I had a little rash here, great big, the preauricular nodes, swollen, not very sick. But this is just, I commented on that in the dictation. Hearing, biggest problem. I'll show you this. The so-called rubella bulge. Okay, and this was after. By this time, so I don't know. It was after I was in school, but we had so many kids with it that were there. This is why the numbering system. And I commented on this: measles, viral, scarlet fever, streptococcal, rubella, viral. I'm not sure what Duke's disease is. from. I don't recall off the top of my head. And then this is fifth disease, that's slap cheek, good one. And why we name it fifth disease, and they used to call roseola sixth disease. And again, it has a lot to do with whether it was ruby red, whether it was similar, whether it was rosy red. Here's that slap cheek. My kids had that. Roseola, my kids had that. Scary. It didn't have the warts. I'm gonna have to come back and do warts Monday. All right. We do warts a couple of times. This is the skin version of warts. We'll get to the general version of the warts next. Thank you. Oh, it's good to be back in the saddle. We're all 6, 8, 10, 13. That's not bad. We're only short, somebody online.